Hi, and welcome to another episode of Silicon Minds Human Hearts. For the global AI community, I'm Roelant, and I'm here with Pamela Fox. For the people who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Pamela, and my title is Python Cloud Advocate, which means that I help Python developers be successful with Azure and anything related to it. So also VS Code, GitHub Copilot, like the whole Microsoft ecosystem of technologies. And when I first joined, that was like 3 years ago, we were trying to make sure that we could deploy web applications on Azure. So I spent a lot of my time on Flask and Django and Fast API and, making sure that all scaled really well when we put them up on Azure. And then AI happened. And so now I spend most of my time figuring out how we can deploy AI applications on Azure, using Python with the most popular Python frameworks.
Yeah, and you're doing such a good job because I've learned quite a lot from your demos, from your presentations, delivering some at the AI tour myself, and it's such a good resource. So very good. But learning has been, I think, the common thing in your career up till now, right? Because I saw on LinkedIn you have also been a lecturer, and you worked on Coursera on one of the first employees there. So is this some deliberate choice?
Yeah, so basically I like to work in some combination of learning and teaching and creating. And so I've that's manifested in different roles. So my very first job was actually developer relations, which is what I'm doing now. And that was at Google. And that was where I worked on the Google Maps API back when it was the most popular API in the world. That was in the days of Ajax and JavaScript and all that. And that was really, really fun. I did that for 5 years. And then after that, I went through the startup phase, making a startup, whatever, not really putting that much into it. And then I worked at Coursera as one of the first engineers. And so that was interesting because we were making a platform for other people to take classes. And so I got to work with professors to try and figure out how can we make this platform better? And I love doing that. Even when I was a kid, my parents are both professors. So when I was a kid, my dad actually had one of the very first distance learning networks. And so I would help him with his distance learning classes in middle school. So I've always loved the idea of trying to scale up education. And maybe part of that's from my parents working on that too. So I loved working at Coursera, but I was actually kind of jealous of the professors getting to put on the courses because I was like, that looks fun. I want to do that, but I don't have a PhD. So then I went to Khan Academy, where I got to put together a bunch of courses. So you can still go on Khan Academy and learn JavaScript, HTML, SQL, all of that from those online courses, interactive courses. And it's really interesting to figure out how to try and make it as interactive as possible and how to scale that to millions of learners, right? And then I found myself, and then I did university lecturing to see what that was like. I was still scaling though, because I was at UC Berkeley, so I had 2,000 students in a semester, which meant I was managing a TA staff of 100, 150. So we were still trying to figure out how to do things at scale. So generally I'm always looking to how can we scale things. And now in developer relations is the same thing because we have thousands and thousands of developers that are using these tools, and we're trying to figure out how can we teach? How can we spread the knowledge amongst all of these developers? That's always what I want to do, is just spread knowledge as widely as possible.
And that's so cool because you have a YouTube channel as well on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just if I'm bored and I want to jump on my YouTube channel and live stream something, right? It's I might as well do it for an audience because I guess people like to watch live coding.
Yeah, but you're actually building very relevant stuff. Because again, this is something I'm going to use for another presentation. This is very actual. This is something I really need. It's about chat history, and keeping track of it. So yeah, definitely check it out. It's amazing. But so nice that it has been. And your parents were professors as well. So this is something they kind of taught you to go out in the world and teach others.
Yeah, I've always been very fortunate with how much I've been able to learn in life. And every time I learn something, I want to immediately share it. I don't like to hoard information. So I love being in positions where I can learn something and then share it back out with the world.
You now have the perfect job, right? As a really developer advocate. Yeah. But how does your day look next to creating content and?
Yeah, I mean, my days are a mix of learning, teaching, and creating. So like on some days I'll be working on pull requests to our repos. So, I've maintained like, I don't know, 100 repos right now for the Azure samples. But some of them are way more popular than others. We have this one RAG repo that I think that has been deployed like thousands and thousands of times, probably 100,000 times now. And that is where I'm the most often because I'm working on new features, or I'm reviewing other people's code, or I'm triaging the issues and responding to issues. And it's really cool though, because people are like really using it and we're giving us their feedback. And that is how I've learned so much about real world RAG, because that's one of the hard things about being a developer advocate, is that we can learn these things and we can teach these things, but because we're not full-time engineers, like we don't necessarily get to see how it works in production, but getting to hear from the community and say like, well, I put this in production and this is what happened. And we're like, okay, great. So now we can learn from that. We can make things better. So I love that, because that's like getting to see how it trickles out in the real world. Because that's the biggest drawback of developer relations, is that it's like you miss that real world experience. So I always recommend to people in developer relations, like you should spend some years in it, some years out of it, like go back and forth, just wildly oscillate between the industry, software engineering and developer relations. And that's how you like develop this mix of, putting it out into production and learning from that, while also getting to do a lot of learning and teaching too.
Yeah, that's very valuable, because else you will always run into, I saw this, it looked very easy, there's this hello world example that is out there, it just works. But yeah, the real world stuff, it can be complicated fast. So yeah. What is the coolest thing you've learned the last months? New technologies, cool frameworks?
Yeah, good question. So as I said, I spend a lot of my time on RAG, but obviously agents and agentic flows are getting really big, and we're trying to plan some contents and hackathons around that. And so I've been trying to get into that. So basically what I've been doing is every week trying out a new framework. And I actually, with my team, the rest of the Python advocates, we've been having study hours. So we'll check out a framework for an hour, like try to use it with Azure or with GitHub models, see how it works, right? So we've done that. We did that with AutoGen this week. And that was really interesting. So we went through all the AutoGen examples and checked out these different kind of orchestrators they have. So they have something called Swarm based off the OpenAI Swarm. They have this new one called Magentic One based off Microsoft research. So it's really cool just to actually, like, once you see it working, then you're like, yeah, that's how it works. And then next week we'll try out like semantic kernel, and then crew AI and pedantic AI, right? So want to get at least a taste for the whole space of agent stuff.
Yeah, so good. And if we're talking about agents, where do you see this going? Are all these agents are going to be autonomous, or do we have some human oversight still?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of them do have a way to hand off back to a user. They call it like the handoff, right? And so a lot of times you can say like, okay, well, this agent can hand off back to a user. And so it's up to the agent or to the orchestrator to decide when they need more information from the user. So that's really good. Like obviously in a lot of cases, we should be involving a user at some point, like either during it when you need more information from the user, or at the very end to review it and say, oh, that was good or bad. So I'm hopeful that we do find, I think that's a hard part, right? How to involve human in the loop, right? It's easy when you're just doing Python with a while loop and you just pop them in input box, right? That's what the samples do. But how do we do that in practicality, right? Like if it's running on a cron job, how do you like pop that up to the humans and say, okay, humans, here's what came out of this cron job, go and like review all that stuff. So I think that's probably maybe like one of the hard parts of it, but probably something we need to figure out common patterns for how to get human in the loop, and when we need it and when we don't need it. The hard part of LLMs is that the better they get, the harder it is to know if they're wrong. So as we get more and more powerful models, like we'll look at the output and be like, yeah, that looks good, and then we're like more likely to rubber stamp it because it feels good, it looks good. So you really have to have domain experts. Like this is what I tell people whenever we talk about evaluating RAG applications. Like if you're looking at those answers that come from the RAG output, you have to know that domain like by the back of your hand. So that's when I do evaluations, I actually do it on my own blog, because I know myself. I know what I've written, and that's what I know the best in life. And so like I can ask my RAG, like, okay, how many kids does Pamela have? And I can evaluate like, it's completely wrong, right? Like, yeah, so that's one of the hard things, is that if we're going to have humans evaluate, we need to make sure they're evaluating something that they have the expertise to evaluate. Otherwise, they're
going
like,
to ask the model probably
yeah,
again. Yeah.
right, that's right.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and for evaluations, what do you use there? Do you use frameworks? Are you building your own stuff?
Yeah, so for evaluation, I've been using the Azure AI Evaluation SDK, and I built my own kind of tool on top of that, just to basically to make the evaluation flow, right? So the SDK gives me the ability to use built-in like GPT metrics, or what we call like AI as a judge metrics. Okay, so like evaluate the groundedness, fluency, coherence, relevance, etc. Give it a 1 to 5 score, and then I can tally up those scores across like usually a set of like at least 200 questions, right? And then I also have my own custom metrics. Which, to be honest, are usually regular expressions, where I like will do so, like, because I have the ground truth data, which is this is what the answer should be along with the citation, and then I can say like, okay, the answer that was generated, does it have like the same citation as the ground truth? So that's actually one of my favorite metrics for RAG, because I generally expect the citations to be the same, or at least to overlap between the ground truth data and the outputted data.
It's so beautiful that, again, we're getting regular expressions. We get all these amazing LLM things, and then you're still using them, and you're writing them yourself, or asking the LLM, because that is my favorite LLM use, I think.
I do a mix. I mean, the interesting thing is, when I was at Berkeley, I did actually teach regular expressions.
Okay, yeah.
So I've been in the position where I have hand graded thousands of regular expression answers on a final exam. I will never again ask students to write regex on an exam, because I never want to grade it. I wonder, like, now I would probably try to use an LLM to grade those answers, because that was so bad. So yeah, I mean, I do a mix of, I use GitHub Copilot quite a bit. So, at this point, it kind of, the lines are blurred as to what I wrote versus what the Copilot wrote. But I also strongly believe in testing, so unit testing, integration testing, and then for these AI applications, doing evaluations, right? You need to do that in order to actually have confidence in what you're putting out there. And even then, even if you have 100% test coverage of your code, you can still have bugs in your code. And the same thing with evaluations. Even if you get all 5s across the board from all your GPT judges, it can still be saying the wrong thing, right? So we have to do all this testing to give ourselves at least a base level confidence, and also to see comparatively how we're doing, right? But we still need to always be skeptic and be ready for there to be quality issues in both our code and our model outputs.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point. And if we look at things like ethics and more responsible AI, what's your take on that? Because evaluations are probably a big part, but is there more to add?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because when we're talking about evaluations, I have been doing a lot of quality evaluations, which is like, was this answer well grounded in the domain data? But there's other kind of evaluations which we can do also with Azure AI, which is like the safety evaluation. So like, are we seeing violence and harmfulness and hatefulness and that sort of thing? And admittedly, I haven't done those as much, because I from my experience, the models that we use from OpenAI, from Azure OpenAI, the GPT-4o models, because they've been through the RLHF process, the reinforcement learning with human feedback, they tend to produce very safe results. Like, they tend to avoid, misogyny and racism, sexism, like that, which is great. So that's why I feel fairly comfortable using those models, because they have been through that process. And also because when you use them through Azure OpenAI, there's already a content safety filter on them. So even if something managed to get through the OpenAI RLHF, then they're going through the Azure OpenAI content safety filter, which checks the prompt, it checks the results, and will flag issues. So that's been my approach, is to use those models. But I am it's actually next week, I'm probably gonna implement those safety evaluations. And with those, what we use is something called the adversarial simulator. It's from the Azure AI Evaluation SDK. And I'm sure there's stuff out there in open source as well. But that adversarial simulator is going to try to get my app to say something bad. And I'm super interested to see if it can get something bad out of the app, given the models that I'm using. So it'll try and get it to say something bad, and then I'll run all the safety evals and see whether it actually uncovers anything. So that'll be really interesting, and yeah, we should definitely be doing that, especially if we're using models that don't have that content safety layer and that we don't know about, like the post processing they've done on it.
Yeah, that's a good, because other models are now popping up that, as you point out, have less content safety. And to me, it was a big surprise that there was an actual service in Azure AI, the content safety service. I totally missed it for the couple of, I think it has been around for years now.
Yep.
I missed it, but there are some valuable services in there as well, so we can use those. Yeah, that's very cool. And of course, we now see a lot of people and enterprises that are concerned about their data residency or their data in general, and they want to run these models locally. Do you have anything experience there to share? How can we do this?
Yeah, so when I want to run models locally, I usually use Ollama. My only local computer is a Mac M1, so it's a laptop. It's not particularly well powered. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. I got it before this whole, LLM thing happened. So I have to use Ollama because Ollama has all these techniques in order to be able to run things on any machine, whether or not you have no GPU or you have the CUDA GPU, or Mac actually does have a GPU called the MPU, I think. So Ollama can use the right technique for the hardware, which is great because I'm not a hardware person. I don't want to have to figure it out myself. So Ollama figures it out. So I can use that to run models up to just around 8 gigs on my machine. I know other folks who have more powerful machines, they're running models up to 60, 64 gigs, 70 gigs. I know when DeepSeek came out, people were trying to see how big they could go, right? Yeah, so I think now people are investing in machines that are more able to run these local models, because it is really nice to just be able to have this local model there that you can use when you need it. My experience with the local models is that they're very good at creativity. I would actually say they're kind of better at writing poems than some of the bigger models, for example, right? So very good at creativity. Generally not as good at RAG, at staying for RAG use cases or cases like that, we want the LLM to be as faithful to the context as possible. And we want it also to be very good at following instructions, because usually we want citations to be done in a certain way. So it needs to be good at all those things. So the majority of local models that I've experienced haven't been able to do that. The best success I've had is with the Llama 3.18b model. That's the one that can do RAG the best on my machine, right? It's also one of the only ones that supports function calling with Ollama. So that's another thing I look at is, can I use function calling with this particular model? Because a lot of times we do use function calling or structured outputs in order to get a more structured output from our model, which can be important for some scenarios as well. So it's helpful for RAG. It's also helpful for agents, because a lot of times agents will use a function call or a structured output in order to decide which agent to pass off to, whose job is it next. They'll just write some JSON for that. So those are things that we look for the local model. So so it's really it's amazing that we have these tools out and we can start using it, and now we can start picking out our local machines based on the ability to run these models. And we can start to use them for some use cases, but we really do need to be very careful with using them for cases where we need high levels of precision and accuracy. And, of course, that brings us back to evaluations, right? So if you're going to consider doing that, run your evaluation and see how it does. And that's also where the safety evaluations would be really important too, because those local models, they're less likely to have gone through the RLHF phase, and they definitely don't have the Azure content safety layer on them because they're running locally.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so use the correct model for the correct use case and make sure you're still safe. That is, in the end, very good advice. And a question we like to ask everyone here, and that is, what is your favorite AI use in your personal every day-to-day life? So not your work life, not the cool LLMs writing code, but what is your other favorite service or services?
this presumes I have a life outside of work. Outside of work, I am a parent with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I basically, the main use case I use is home assistance in order to play the right song that we need to play. So that's basically the AI that I use outside of work is just, well, it's Google. I say, hey, Google, play blah, 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 blah. And to be honest, a lot of times it messes up and we're just sitting there and just listening to something completely off. But I was okay with it the other day. Like, I started playing 90s R&B while I was in the bath with a 2-year-old. I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's get down in the bath with this 90s R&B, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, I guess, the way I use AI the most often outside of work.
It almost feels retro.
It's so retro. Yeah, I think also those assistants don't necessarily use LLMs yet. I think they've been like testing whether they should or shouldn't. So I actually don't know for that use case what the best model is for it. But it's interesting to see how it does. And pretty soon my 5-year-old is going to be able to start getting commands out of the Home Assistant. And I'm a bit scared of what's going to happen and what songs we're going to be listening to.
Fun times, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing knowledge, again, teaching us about all these different things. So thank you so much and hope to see a lot more of you in the future.
Sure. Thank you for the interview. It was really fun.